Hi everyone, this is an introduction to week 12, Gender and Schooling, and everything for this unit is due Thursday, April 20th at 11:59 p.m. And this is our second to last module, by the way. We are still in Unit 3, which is called History and Contemporary School Reform, and our goal here is to think intentionally about how history relates to and informs current practice. For this module, start with Jackie Blount's essay on manly men and womanly women, which is one of my favorite articles of all time because what she writes is such a surprise. It's one of my great, wow, I never thought about this before articles. The second article is by Richard Quantz, who recently retired, or almost about to be finally retired, professor of educational leadership. This is an old article, but it's one that he remains very proud of and that I really like too. For one thing, it was one of the first articles in the History of Education Quarterly that relied on oral history. It was published in 1985, and oral history was still a pretty radical concept in those days. These were the early days of revisionist social history, and relying on the voices and memories of common people, in this case, retired teachers in Hamilton, Ohio, seemed so unreliable and possibly not even real history. Think back to Howard Zinn's article that we read early in the semester and how the history of the Ludlow massacre was for so long told by the victors and not by the victims. And that was in part because the victors seemed so much more reliable in their evidence. Social history, or the history of common people, has really radical potential because it offers such a different perspective on history. Also interesting here is that Quantz's finding is so surprising. During the Depression, when life was so hard and teachers were so overworked and underpaid, why did they not join teacher unions to improve their working conditions? Why something did not happen is often as interesting as why something did happen. The last article is by Margaret Krockow and Callie Waite on the topic of race and gender in higher education, and it's a kind of historiographical essay on the nature of the history in this research field, although they also make some pretty clear conclusions, which is very helpfully positioned in their final section called Conclusion. We have only one discussion question for this module, and it asks you to focus on the topic of historiography and the ways in which historians use evidence. This will also help in your thinking about your historical research paper assignment. Gender is a really good topic for looking at evidence, historical evidence, because the historical data about women in education, and particularly women of color in education, is often not immediately accessible through traditional historiographical means. Think, for example, about how Jackie Blount draws on a lot of different types of evidence, including both quantitative and qualitative data, and different fields of research, for example, psychology and gender studies. You can literally see how she uses these different types of evidence as building blocks to construct her argument. Quantz's article draws on oral history, and Krockow and Waite focus on biography and institutional history. So the one question is this. What is your reaction to these different approaches? Is oral history more effective to you than quantitative data? Why or why not? What do we learn and not learn from individual biographical studies that we do or don't learn from a larger sweeping national study? One way you can approach this question is simply to explain why you liked one article more than another, but be sure to base your explanations on the way that the historical evidence was analyzed and presented and how you received it. So enjoy. The semester is winding down.